This subject is something that I've been meaning to talk about for quite some time. I wasn't sure how I would handle this topic at all, but after some thought, I believed I cracked the code. I believe I have just enough insight to properly discuss about the implementation of style switching and the concerns surrounding this mechanic. To give a brief explanation for those who don't know what style switching is the act of switching through different styles that Dante has in DMC4 and DMC5. There's Trickster, Swordmaster, Gunslinger, and Royal Guard. Each direction on the D-pad represents a different style that you can switch to on the fly. In DMC4, there's an additional fifth style where if you press the D-pad in the direction that your current style is selected, you will select this style. When you change into the style that you want, you then press the style button to execute that ability. The style button, circle for PlayStation or B for Xbox, changes its function depending on what style you're in. If you're in Trickster, the buttons serve for Trickster abilities, and if you change styles, so does your abilities. Style switching in the Devil May Cry community has always been a very hot topic that people discuss about in regards of accessibility and comfort for the player. Some of these arguments that I've witnessed about style switching time and time again is that it is bad game design because you don't have immediate access to your tools, and that it is inefficient and wastes a lot of input. Accessing these styles may depend on your controls. With keyboard and mouse, you can configure your settings to a wide variety of keys, so you can get really creative with your setup. But as for PlayStation and Xbox, these are the main controllers that people use to play Devil May Cry, one having symmetrical analog stick placements and the other does not. Some will say that the Xbox controller may give you a harder time dealing with style switching due to the stick placements, but it's more of a mixed bag. Some people say that they've yielded positive results with the controller without any problems, and others, well, they kind of suffered from the placement, yet they dealt with it anyway. There are even well-known players in the Devil May Cry community that use an Xbox controller layout for quite some time. As for myself, I can use an Xbox controller, but I prefer a PlayStation controller. Despite the controller differences, both still require you to move your thumb back and forth between an analog stick to the D-pad. Doing this in the middle of combat can get really annoying at first, but as time goes on, it becomes almost second nature. This is usually the hurdle that a lot of new players have to overcome when they're learning this mechanic. And due to this, style switching gets bashed that you have to use styles in order to stay in the air with Dante. While this might hold some truth for DMC4 Dante, this is absolutely not true for DMC5 Dante. He has plenty of moves and plenty of tools to keep himself in the air without even touching the D-pad. Even for DMC4 Dante, you can stay in the air to at least some degree if you utilize Pandora and Lucifer while jump canceling. Since the moves are slow, you have plenty of time to jump out of Lucifer's splash move to cancel it into another move. And if all of this is still too fast for you, then I highly recommend making sure that turbo mode is set to off. People often jump into Devil May Cry with turbo mode on when the game has it off by default, simply because other people are doing it, or they think that the game feels better when they should take their time learning the game. And I assume that seeing all of this content that style players have created might get newcomers frustrated because they want to do these same things. Maybe even frustrated enough to where they start looking for alternative solutions for different hand grips. The claw grip is often passed around like a holy grail of solutions if you wish to learn how to play as Dante. The claw grip, or clawing, is the act of holding the controller with your index finger resting on the D-pad. Some people may adapt a claw grip to play optimally, but that's only due to certain very specific advanced techniques. Guard flying is often brought up as the main reason why clawing is needed. It is done by using a move that generates momentum, which you can cancel the move with a jump and then guard. The momentum is transferred to that guard, which makes Dante looks like he's just, well, flying. Doing this requires very precise timing of switching through your styles at the right moment, especially if you're switching from Trickster to Guard, which is funny because you don't even need to claw in order to use it. Ever since players have revealed their hands when playing various DMC games, people have gotten the misconception that clawing is necessary, and I even blame myself for also contributing to this. The main reason why I started using this grip is so that very few obscure techniques, some borderline useless, could be achievable without training myself daily in order to use it with a normal grip. There's even some trade-offs learning claw that I had to deal with simply because my index finger was not fast enough compared to my thumb. In the grand scheme of things, without clawing, I play perfectly fine. I just prefer to use it. And if you ever consider using this grip, then I highly advise you to keep a relaxed hand and not grip your controller like a madman. And also make sure to take breaks too. This goes for even playing normally too. I've had hand problems myself, but this was well before I learned claw, and it's only in my right hand, which was due to cutting chicken all damn day at my old job. And if this is not enough to alter your perception about style switching, then let's just talk about a few other games. A series that I would like to bring up first are the games made by FromSoft. The Soulsborne series is widely known for its unique control layout. On the D-pad, you have access to your inventory. Depending on how much you had loaded up for your equipment, you might have to tap a direction multiple times to get what you want. This could be during enemy fights or boss fights, which means that you need to maneuver around without getting hit while still using the D-pad. While you can equip items in the menu, it is very unwise to do this during a fight. Kingdom Hearts also requires you to use the D-pad to access items, magic, and special commands through a menu during fights too. You have shortcut commands that avoided using the D-pad, yet they were only in limited slots, which means that you were forced to use the D-pad to access the rest of your stuff. Clawing isn't necessary for these games at all, but there are people who actively use it. There are also first-person shooter games where the competitive community often found claw grip to be very beneficial because you could use the camera while still having access to the face button. Now, there are controllers with buttons on the back where you can program them to whatever input that you want, and you can use them for any game too. However, this boils all down to preference. There are people who play with a normal grip because they find it to be comfortable, and same for those who learn how to claw grip. So knowing that, would you call all first-person shooters on consoles to be fundamentally bad because people dealt with the same issues that DMC does, or other games in general? And if not, then why is it fine for these games but not DMC? Where do we draw the line here? And if you're still willing to state that style switching is bad when other games place almost equally important systems on the D-pad, then I have one last comparison. When DMC Devil May Cry was released, it was shown that it did not have any style switching or a lock-on. Instead, it offered to streamline the combat system by allowing you to have a dedicated launcher and dodge buttons with an auto lock-on system. Alongside this, there were Angel and Demon modes that you can access by holding down the L2 or R2 buttons. This gives you access to moves similar to Skystar, High Time, or Rainstorm, all without pressing the D-pad, which were now regulated to the weapons and guns. On paper, this may seem superior to having style switching on the D-pad, except you're still using the D-pad. The problem of style switching has not disappeared because you now introduce the same problem, except it's with the weapons and guns placed on the D-pad. It also creates new problems too, where one, the more weapons that you give Dante, the more that you have to use the D-pad to switch through them. And two, because of the streamlined gameplay, tons of moves are lost. You go from having a wide variety of moves to style and toy around with, to now essential moves with very specific purposes to them. With these streamlined controls, you can't customize any type of weapon setup that you can take and leave at your leisure. The balance between options and accessibility is something that developers have to sit down and solve across a lot of different hardware between PC and consoles. Something that is hard to do, yet people feel the need to criticize style switching to offer alternative solutions that actually make things a lot worse. I have seen several proposed control schemes for Devil May Cry that either puts weapons and guns on the D-pad, similar to DMC Devil May Cry, or it completely removes all the functions for the D-pad to add a control scheme that requires you to hold down a button to access your guns and your weapons. The goal of these layout designs was that you could use less inputs to access your styles and weapons, which, alright, let's test that theory. So let me show you an example of one of them that I can actually test out in DMC5 that uses the Steam API configuration. This was a layout that I found on YouTube, and I'm going to keep this person anonymous just for the potential threat that they may get harassed. So, like, here we go. This control scheme aims to simplify style switching by giving you one button press for each of your style actions. When you press a style button, it switches to that style and simultaneously executes that move with that same input. L1 is for Royal Guard actions, L2 is for Gunslinger, R2 is for Swordmaster, and Circle is for Trickster. This, I will admit, makes it easy to go through Dante's moveset with his styles, because it combines button presses to one function. However, there is a trade-off. Everything else is mapped to the D-pad. That includes Devil Trigger, that includes Sin Devil Trigger, which is a custom input that automatically charges if you press down on the D-pad. Gun swapping is on the left of the D-pad, and Devil Arm swapping is on the right. You now have essentially doubled the workload that the D-pad has to manage. So the choice for clawing for preference becomes an actual requirement. If you're like me, who uses 4 guns and 4 devil arms, good luck. Good fucking luck. The harsher reality of most of these control schemes is that it makes it harder for you to customize your controls if you don't want to deal with it. Imagine if you wanted to put weapons and guns back on their previous location for swapping on the trigger buttons when the designer put it on the D-pad. This creates a huge problem for customizability. This is why style switching was designed the way it is, to make it easy for people to switch their controls if needed. This is why you only need to press the button rather than holding it down. Imagine dealing with style modifiers that required you to hold down the style button similar to DMC Devil May Cry, but for all styles. Even with the proposed setup that I've tried, which doesn't require me to hold down anything, if I want to put DT on something that I'm more familiar with, say L1, well then I just put the style action back on the D-pad, except this time it contains all the functions of the style. So in order to use this style, I need to press the D-pad while pushing the control stick in a direction. Every time that you remove a feature from one place, that function has to go somewhere else. In fact, stay tuned because I'm going to cover over these control layouts that I've stumbled across in a separate video. Speaking of inputs, there's also the topic of replacing all of style switching with input commands, granting you more access to moves without the use of the D-pad, which I gotta say, I agree with this to a certain extent. False Hat in DMC5 makes use of command inputs for the gun button instead of style, enabling you to press forward and back for 2 different moves. The reason why this works very well for this weapon is that when you're shooting, it roots you in place and prevents you from moving. Even in the air, it halts your momentum. However, for your handguns and your shotgun, you can fire away and still strafe around your target. If these weapons had command inputs, moving forwards or backwards could prevent you from firing normally while retreating or approaching. Even jumping away or towards the enemy might have the same issue, which is why I believe that these weapons did not receive directional inputs on the gun button, to prevent beginner players from accidentally inputting command moves that they didn't want. Kalina Ann also follows the same rule that False Hat does, making the player stationary when they're firing rocket. However, this doesn't have any command moves at all. And in this one instance, I feel like Kalina Ann's moveset could be expanded here. But as for all the style moves, this would not work very well because all of the load that's on the D-pad now has to go to somewhere else. Specifically the analog stick. Command inputs take time to execute. If there was more back, forward, or God forbid 360 inputs, it would drastically increase the barrier of execution for those who are new to the series. Even further if you want to jump cancel in the air and use style moves too. Even having too many forward or back inputs creates a large hurdle for people who are not used to this because they'll have to use the analog stick a lot more just to get the style moves to come out. Alright, so let me see what I got to talk about next. I got to talk about weapon wheels.
You serious?
Now, I don't mind the weapon wheels in some video games. I really don't. With games like Ratchet & Clank, it's not that bad because they play at a slower pace compared to Devil May Cry. You get time to sit down and analyze your target so you can figure out what gun that you want to pick, which is logical here. The same sort of goes with Marvel Spider-Man too, but I felt like they could have done a better job at implementing the weapon wheel. Maybe they could have made it so that it didn't pause the game as you were trying to select whatever you want. But I don't ever want to see it in Devil May Cry ever again. After dealing with DMC3 on the Switch port, yeah, I think we should just deal with the DMC5 loadout and build on top of it. Because having to switch both your weapons and your guns with the wheel that you're trying to make quick choices for both of them is absolutely the most egregious thing that I ever had to deal with, and I don't want to deal with that again. Every time that I have to select the weapon that I want, towards the end of my weapon or gun wheel, I have to hold down the button to use the right analog stick to get to that specific weapon. But when you flick the control stick in that direction because you're trying to be as quick as possible, sometimes it goes to a different direction that you don't even want. So yeah, no, I don't want this. I believe that style switching ended up being disguised as a problem in DMC4, when the real culprit was DMC4 lacking a cohesive moveset for Dante's devil arms and his guns. The weapons themselves did not mesh well outside of the use of style switching because the weapons lacked a lot of options. While DMC3 had weapons and styles that were fully fleshed out and dealt really good damage, DMC4 had weapons and guns that did not do the same amount of damage. Some missing entire moves compared to their previous versions, and their styles as well too. Dashing with Trickster on the ground in DMC4 required you to guard cancel it in order to link dashes together, which already isn't easy to pull off. But in DMC3, you could dash 3 times on the ground when this style was fully upgraded. This was one of the things that I really disliked about DMC4 because the existing weapons did not receive any additional quirks that made them worthwhile without using Swordmaster or Gunslinger. On their own, both devil arms and guns were very lackluster. It's only when you use all of Dante's tools where he shines the most. DMC5, however, fixed this issue by giving Dante's tools even more functions than their predecessors give. Devil Sword Dante's aerial rave can now be used without Swordmaster. This was a move that you had to use with Swordmaster in the previous games. King Cerberus now has more utility with multiple forms, and Balrog can switch between kicks and punches, basically creating weapon switching within a weapon. While Cavalier might not have the same amount of systems that other weapons have, it balances it out by giving you these gear modes. During these attack strings, you have time to switch between styles when you hold down the melee button so you can switch to Swordmaster moves. Even if you don't want to switch through the styles, Devil May Cry 5 gives you more of an incentive to stay in that respective style. A lot of the tools that one weapon has is usually shared across the board in some way, so you have every option on hand. Each devil arm has a launcher of some sort to make any demon airborne, which you can follow up with attack strings without Swordmaster. DMC3 had this same philosophy without style switching, and DMC5 brought this back. Even if you make a false scenario where you didn't have a launcher for a specific weapon, well, you had Air Taunt that just launches the enemies for you with a single press of a button. The styles have more utility on their own, and Devil Sword Dante augmented the styles even further. All of this makes style switching very accessible to use because you aren't forced to use it, and you can pick whatever setup that you want. Although, if you really want to have a dedicated dodge button for DMC5, you can always just stick to Trickster, and there's still plenty of moves that you can choose from in the ground and in the air. I hope I was able to thoroughly explain my points in this video. I appreciate you all for listening to what I have to say, and hopefully my words made sense. Style switching is all about creating another layer of expression for the player to use at any given time. Dante in DMC5 has a colossal amount of moves, so fitting all of his inputs onto a controller with limited buttons is something that the developers spent a lot of time trying to figure out. If I didn't explain my point correctly, then I guess I screwed up. But as usual, thank you for your time. Comment below if you have any other topics that you would like to hear me discuss about, and I will see you all next time.